A winter dawn crept over the city of Chang'an, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet, and rose frost dusted the dark, curved roof tiles of the Wu family's compound, turning each one into a tiny, glimmering blade. The world outside was silent, muffled by the cold. Even the crows, usually so raucous at this hour, seemed to have retreated into themselves, their cries distant and hoarse. Yet inside the women's quarters, the air pulsed with a different energy, a quiet tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Wu Zhao sat upright on her narrow wooden bed, spine straight as a bamboo stalk. The woven mat beneath her was stiff with the chill prickling her bare feet. She pressed her toes into it, feeling the roughness ground her, even as her thoughts soared. The thin quilt wrapped around her shoulders smelled of camphor and rice straw, familiar and faintly bitter, a scent that always reminded her she was still a daughter, not yet a woman of her own making. She listened to the muffled sounds of servants rising in the pre-dawn gloom, the soft slap of slippers on stone, the splash of water being poured into a basin, the low, urgent whisper of a cook scolding her apprentice. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed, its call sharp and defiant, slicing through the hush like a blade. Wu Zhao closed her eyes, letting the sound linger in her mind, a promise that even the smallest voice could command attention. She drew a slow breath, tasting the cold in the back of her throat. The air inside the room was heavy with the scent of old wood, mingled with traces of her mother's rose oil, and the mustiness of winter clothes packed away in cedar chests. Frost had crept across the paper windows overnight, etching delicate patterns that caught the weak morning light and scattered it across the floor in trembling patches. Her hands, slender and still soft with youth, rested in her lap. She flexed her fingers, remembering the feel of silk thread slipping between them as she embroidered yesterday, her stitches neat, her pattern precise, yet her mind restless and far away. She had been praised for her diligence, but the words had tasted hollow. The world expected so little of her, she thought, to be obedient, to be silent, to be beautiful and clever, but never too clever. She was expected to be a daughter of the Wu family, nothing more. But she wanted more. She wanted everything. A shiver ran through her, not just from the cold, but from the sheer audacity of the thought. She pressed her palm over her heart, feeling it beat quick and stubborn beneath her ribs. The world outside might be frozen, but inside her, something burned. She remembered her father's words from the night before, spoken in the formal hall, his voice low but edged with impatience. A daughter's worth is in her virtue, her obedience, her ability to bring honor to her family. Remember that, Zhao. He had not looked at her as he spoke, his gaze fixed on the scrolls arrayed before him, the ink still wet and gleaming in the lamplight. Her mother had sat beside him, her face a careful mask, proud but wary, as if she feared what might happen if her daughter stepped too far, beyond the lines drawn for her. Wu Zhao's jaw tightened at the memory. She turned her head and looked out the window, watching as the first rays of sunlight caught in the frost, turning it to fire. She longed to break free from this small room, from the careful, measured life laid out for her. She longed to step into the world, to leave a mark so deep that no one could ever erase it. But for now, she was still a girl, in a cold room, listening to the world wake up around her. A servant knocked quietly at the door, the sound soft but insistent. "Miss Zhao, your mother asks for you in the main hall. The tea is ready." Wu Zhao stood, gathering her quilt around her shoulders for one last moment of warmth. She felt the rough wood of the floor beneath her soles, the bite of the cold, the slight tremble in her legs. She was aware of every sensation, every sound, every scent, every flicker of light, because she knew that one day she would remember these mornings. One day she would look back and see the seeds of ambition taking root in the frost. She exhaled, steadying herself, and walked toward the door. The world waited, silent, expectant, and full of hidden promise. The main hall of the Wu compound was a world apart from the quiet of the sleeping quarters. Here, the air was warmer, thick with the scent of sandalwood incense curling from a bronze burner shaped like a crouching lion. The polished wooden floor gleamed, reflecting the pale morning light that filtered through latticed windows. Silk banners in shades of crimson and gold hung from the beams, their embroidered dragons seeming to twist and shimmer as the flames from the lanterns danced beneath them. Wu Zhao entered quietly, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. Her mother, Lady Yang, sat at the low table, her posture as perfect as the calligraphy scrolls that lined the walls. She wore a robe of deep blue silk, the fabric embroidered with silver cranes that glimmered in the shifting light. Her dark hair was swept up in a high knot, held in place by jade pins that caught the glow of the morning. Lady Yang's eyes flicked over her daughter, taking in every detail, the careful arrangement of her hair, the way her plain cotton robe was belted just so, the set of her mouth. "Sit, Zhao." Her voice soft but edged with steel. Wu Zhao obeyed, folding her legs beneath her and lowering her gaze. The scent of fresh tea, green and grassy, with a hint of roasted chestnut, rose from the porcelain cups set before them. She reached for hers, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. A moment of silence stretched between mother and daughter, filled only by the faint crackle of the brazier and the distant, rhythmic sweep of a servant's broom in the courtyard. Lady Yang finally broke the silence. "Your father has spoken with the matchmaker again. There are several proposals. You are 16 now, Zhao. It is time to consider your future." Wu Zhao's fingers tightened around her cup. She felt her heart pound, a tight, fluttering thing in her chest. "Mother, she began. But Lady Yang cut her off with a raised hand. "I know what you want to say," her mother said, her gaze sharp. "You think yourself different. You think you are meant for more than a marriage arranged for the family's benefit. But our world does not change for the sake of one girl's ambitions." Her voice softened, but her eyes did not. "You must learn to bend, Zhao, like the willow in the wind." Wu Zhao looked up, searching her mother's face for some sign of understanding, some flicker of shared longing. But Lady Yang's expression was unreadable, her beauty as cold and perfect as carved jade. Before she could reply, the door slid open, and a boy strode in, a servant, but one who moved with unusual confidence. His name was Min, and though he was only a year older than Wu Zhao, he carried himself with the assurance of someone twice his age. He wore a simple robe of faded green, patched at the elbows, but his eyes sparkled with mischief. "Forgive me, Lady Yang," Min said, bowing low. "The master requests your presence in the study. There is a visitor from the capital." Lady Yang rose smoothly, her silk robes whispering over the floor. She gave Wu Zhao a long, measuring look. "We will speak more of this later." With that, she swept from the room, her footsteps disappearing down the corridor. As soon as the door closed, Min straightened, his formality melting away. He grinned at Wu Zhao, his eyes bright. "You look like a caged bird," he whispered, glancing toward the empty doorway. "Did she tell you about the merchant's son, the one with the crooked teeth?" Wu Zhao tried to smile, but it faltered. "She wants me to bend, to become someone I am not." Min's grin faded, replaced by something softer. He sat beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint tang of soap and the earthiness of his skin. "You're not like the others," he said quietly. "You see things. You want things." Wu Zhao studied her hands, the delicate bones and pale skin. "Sometimes I wish I could be content, like my sisters, like the other girls." Min shook his head. "No, you don't. You want to fly. I can see it in your eyes." She looked at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them, the silk banners and incense fading into the background. She felt the warmth of his presence, the steady pulse of hope in her chest. "Min," she whispered, "do you ever wonder what's beyond these walls? Beyond Chang'an?" He laughed, a low musical sound. "All the time. I dream of the river, of the end." The palace gates rose before Wu Zhao like the jaws of some ancient, slumbering beast, stone teeth glinting beneath the pale morning sun. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the faintest trace of sandalwood smoke, drifting from censers that hung like silent sentinels above the entrance. Her silk slippers, new and stiff, pressed into the damp flagstones. The pale lavender hem of her robe, threaded with silver cranes, trailed behind her, gathering droplets of dew and dust. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, though her heart thundered in her chest, faster than the clatter of the palace guards' spears against their armor. A thin mist curled along the ground, swirling around her ankles, swallowing the edges of the vast courtyard. From somewhere beyond the red-lacquered gates came the muffled clang of a bell, deep and resonant, calling the day to order. The sound vibrated in her bones. Wu Zhao inhaled, the air sharp with the tang of wet stone and the faint, bitter aroma of pine resin from the garden trees. She felt the unfamiliar weight of her hair, piled high and pinned with jade combs. Her mother's hands had twisted and pulled until her scalp burned. But now the style felt like a helmet, a shield against whatever waited inside. She paused at the threshold, her body tense, muscles drawn tight as bowstrings. A line of eunuchs stood to her left, their faces carefully blank, eyes sliding away from her as if she were made of smoke. To her right, two older women in dark blue robes, palace matrons, watched her with sharp, appraising gazes. Their hands were folded inside their sleeves, but Wu Jiao saw the flicker of movement, a ring finger tapping, a thumb tracing the seam of silk. Nervousness or calculation. She could not tell she was only 14, and yet the world she had known, her father's modest house, the sun-warmed courtyard where she used to read forbidden stories, the kitchen thick with the scent of ginger and garlic, felt impossibly distant, washed away by the tide that had swept her here. The memory of her mother's voice whispered in her mind, "You must learn to see without looking, to hear what is not said." She clung to those words now, as she stood on the edge of a life she could barely imagine. Inside, the corridors of the palace were cool and dim. Light filtered through latticed screens, painting the stone floors with shifting patterns. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the distant metallic tang of ceremonial bronze. Wu Jiao's hand brushed the sleeve of her robe, fingers tracing the embroidered cranes, symbols of longevity and wisdom her mother had told her. Would she need wisdom here, or only cunning? She tried to steady her breathing, but anxiety crawled beneath her skin. What if she made a mistake? What if she drew the wrong kind of attention? She had heard the stories, concubines who spoke out of turn, who stepped into the wrong corridor, who angered the wrong woman, disappeared, erased as if they had never existed. Behind every screen, she imagined eyes watching, mouths whispering the palace was a maze, and she was a mouse let loose among snakes. Her escort, a stooped eunuch with a reedy voice, cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the hush, "Lady Wu, this way." His footsteps were soft, but the keys at his belt jingled with each step, an oddly cheerful sound in the gloom. Wu Jiao followed, her own feet nearly silent, her senses straining to absorb every detail. The cool brush of silk against her skin, the faint musk of ancient wood, the distant trill of a nightingale in the garden. In her mind, questions tumbled over one another. Would the emperor notice her? Would she be safe? Who would be friend? Who foe? She forced herself to walk tall, shoulders back, chin lifted. She would not let them see her fear. She was not a frightened girl, not anymore. She was Wu Jiao, daughter of a scholar, clever and watchful, ready to learn the language of power, even if it tasted like ashes. As she passed beneath a painted arch, the light caught on the gold thread of her collar, flashing like a promise. Or a warning. Wu Jiao took a breath, filling her lungs with the mingled scents of incense and rain, and stepped forward into the heart of the dragon's lair. The Hall of Blossoms was alive with whispers. Wu Jiao entered at the tail of a line of girls, each draped in silks of pale pink or green, their faces painted into careful masks. The room itself was a riot of color. Crimson lanterns glowed overhead, casting warm light on lacquered screens painted with peonies and night-blooming jasmine. The air was thick with perfume, sweet osmanthus, sharp as honey, and the powdery scent of crushed rice. Beneath it all lingered something sour, like old sweat or fear. A group of older concubines lounged near the far window, their laughter brittle and bright as shattered porcelain. Their eyes flicked over the newcomers, weighing, measuring, dismissing. Each movement was deliberate. A fan snapping open, a sleeve flicking to hide a smirk, a hairpin glinting in the lamplight. Wu Jiao felt their gaze settle on her, cool and assessing, and she straightened instinctively. At the center of the room, a woman in deep red silk sat alone, her posture regal, her face unreadable. This, Wu Jiao realized, must be Lady Shu, the highest-ranking consort after the Empress herself. Her hair was coiled in an elaborate knot, studded with pearls, and her eyes were the color of old iron. As Wu Jiao approached, Lady Shu's gaze swept over her, pausing for a heartbeat, then moving on. A matron called the girls forward one by one, announcing their names and family backgrounds. Wu Jiao's turn came. She stepped forward, bowing low, the silk of her robe whispering against the polished floor. Wu Jiao, daughter of Wu Shihuo, of Bingzhou. A scholar's daughter? We are honored. Her voice was smooth, but Wu Jiao caught the hint of amusement beneath it. Wu Jiao kept her eyes lowered, as custom demanded, but her mind raced. Was that a compliment or a warning? Did Lady Shu see her as a threat, or merely as another pawn? Don't trust her smiles. A voice murmured, soft, almost inaudible. Wu Jiao glanced sideways. The speaker was a girl about her own age, with a round face and quick, darting eyes. She wore a robe of faded blue, and her hands twisted nervously in her sleeves. Wu Jiao hesitated, then offered a small nod. The girl's mouth twitched in a fleeting smile. I'm May, from the kitchens. Her eyes flicked toward Lady Shu. She eats girls like us for breakfast. Before Wu Jiao could reply, a sharp voice cut through the air. Enough idle chatter. A matron strode forward, her face pinched with disapproval. You are here to serve, not gossip. May ducked her head, cheeks flushing. Wu Jiao bit back a retort. She knew better than to draw attention on her first day. As the matron herded the girls toward the far end of the hall, Wu Jiao found herself beside May. Their shoulders brushed, and Wu Jiao felt a strange comfort in the contact, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. May's breath was quick, her fingers trembling. You're brave, May whispered. Most girls cry on their first day. I'm terrified, Wu Jiao admitted, but I'd rather they not see it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another group of women, older, more elaborately dressed, their faces painted in bold colors. They swept into the hall in a flurry of silk and perfume, laughter trailing behind them like a cloud. At their head was a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a voice like a bell. That's Lady Sun, May whispered, one of the Emperor's favorites. She hates newcomers. As if on cue, Lady Sun's gaze landed on Wu Jiao. Her lips curled in a smile that did not reach her eyes. A new face, she said, her tone light but edged with steel, and such a pretty one. Tell me, little dove, do you sing as sweetly as you look? Wu Jiao forced herself to meet Lady Sun's gaze, searching for the right answer. I try to serve as best I can, honored lady, she replied, bowing her head. We shall see. Lady Sun's smile widened. The Emperor likes clever girls, but clever girls often find themselves alone. Her fingers brushed Wu Jiao's cheek. The touch, feather light, but cold as ice. A hush fell over the hall. Wu Jiao felt every eye upon her, waiting to see how she would respond. The world had shrunk to a single courtyard, hemmed in by high gray walls that pressed close like the sides of a stone coffin. Wu Jiao sat on a worn bench of pale cedar, her fingers tracing the soft splinters where the wood had split with age and rain. Above her, the sky was a heavy bowl of cloud, bruised purple and slate, threatening rain that never quite fell. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of crushed jasmine petals, trampled underfoot by the silent procession of nuns moving through the cloister. Their footsteps were muffled by the moss that crept between the flagstones, softening every sound, making the world seem distant and underwater. She listened to the quiet, broken only by the occasional caw from a crow perched on the crumbling roof tiles. The bird's cry was sharp and lonely, echoing off the stone. Wu's eyes followed it, watching its glossy black wings slice through the air. She envied its freedom, the careless way it soared above the walls that held her fast. Her own body felt heavy, weighted by the thick woolen robes of mourning, a drab brown that scratched at her skin and stank faintly of old incense and wood smoke. The cloth was coarse, a far cry from the silks she had once worn, embroidered with peonies and dragons, shimmering in candlelight. Now, every movement made her keenly aware of the roughness, a reminder that she was no longer of the palace, but of the dust. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap, the chill of early spring seeping through the sleeves and biting her skin. She closed her eyes and inhaled, searching for the faintest trace of the cinnamon oil she used to rub into her wrists, a small luxury she had clung to in the palace, now forbidden here. Instead, she smelled only the musty dampness of stone and the distant tang of rain. She tried to push away the ache that had settled in her chest, a dull, persistent longing for something she could not name. Was it for the life she had lost, or the one she had never truly had? Her mind wandered back to the moment she arrived at the convent, led by a silent procession of veiled women, their faces hidden, their eyes averted. She remembered the clang of the gate as it closed behind her, the iron cold and unyielding, and the sudden hush that had fallen over the courtyard, as if the world itself had drawn a breath and held it. She had stood there, trembling, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would echo off the walls. The abbess had spoken to her then, her voice low and kind, but firm. Here you will find peace. Here you will let go of the world. But Wu didn't want peace. Peace was for those who had surrendered, who had nothing left to fight for. She was not yet ashes, not yet the wind picked up, tugging at the loose strands of her hair, which had grown long and unruly in the months since she had been shorn of her status. She reached up and tucked a lock behind her ear, feeling the roughness of her own skin, the calluses that had formed from hours of scrubbing floors and kneading dough in the convent kitchens. Her hands, once delicate and soft, had become tools, useful, but no longer beautiful. She opened her eyes and looked at the sky again, watching the clouds shift and churn. Somewhere beyond those walls, the world moved on without her. The palace, with its golden roofs and endless corridors, would be bustling with new intrigues, new favorites, new whispers in the shadows. Emperor Taizong was dead, his court had scattered, and she, Wu Zhao, had been swept away like so much dust, discarded and forgotten. The words stung. She pressed her lips together, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She would not be forgotten. She would not let her name fade into silence, lost among the prayers and incense smoke. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance flared. She would find a way back. She would not become one of the silent women who drifted through these halls, their eyes empty, their voices lost in endless chants. She stood, her legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked slowly across the courtyard. The stones were slick beneath her bare feet, cold and unyielding. She paused at the edge of the koi pond, watching the fish glide through the murky water, their scales flashing gold and white. They moved with purpose, unhurried but never still, always searching. She envied their certainty, their quiet persistence. A bell tolled somewhere in the distance, its deep, mournful note vibrating through the air. It was a sound that marked the passage of time in the convent, a reminder that the world beyond was measured in heartbeats and prayers, not in ambition or desire. Wu closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, steady and relentless. She would endure, she would wait, and when the moment came, she would seize it with both hands. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and lingered long after the sun had risen. Wu Zhao knelt on the hard stone floor of the chapel, her knees aching beneath the thin cushion. The scent of incense was thick in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of wax from the candles that flickered on the altar. Shadows danced across the walls, thrown by the wavering light, and the low murmur of chanting filled the space, a steady undercurrent that threatened to lull her into numbness. She forced her mind to stay sharp, to focus on the present. Across the aisle, Sister Yanjun moved with quiet grace, her hands folded in prayer, her lips moving silently. Yanjun was older, her face lined with years of devotion and sorrow, but her eyes were bright, alive with a kind of fierce intelligence that Wu recognized at once. Yanjun had taken her under her wing, teaching her the rituals and routines of convent life, but there was always a distance between them, a wariness, as if both women sensed the secrets the other kept. After prayers, as the other nuns filed out, Yanjun lingered. She approached Wu, her footsteps soft on the stone. "You were distracted today. I find it hard to quiet my mind. There are too many memories." "We all have memories, child. The trick is to let them become part of your prayers, not your burdens. Some memories are heavier than others. You do not have to carry them alone. Why do you help me? Because I see myself in you. Once I too was brought here against my will. I too raged against the walls. Did you ever escape? No, I found my peace here. But you are different. You burn too brightly to be contained." The words sent a shiver down Wu's spine. She straightened, her chin lifting. "I will not stay here forever. Few do. But the world outside is not as forgiving as you remember. I would rather risk the world than rot in silence." Before Yanjin could reply, the abbess entered, her presence commanding and severe. She was tall and thin, her robes immaculate, her hair pulled back into a tight knot. Her eyes swept the chapel, landing on Wu and Yanjin with a hint of suspicion. "Sister Yanjin, your duties await." Yanjin bowed her head and slipped away, leaving Wu alone with the abbess. The abbess approached, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped in front of Wu, her gaze sharp. "You are restless. This is a place of reflection, not rebellion." "I am trying to find peace, Mother." The abbess studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. "You were sent here to atone for your past. Do not mistake this sanctuary for a prison. Many would envy your safety." Wu bit back a retort, forcing herself to remain calm. "Yes, Mother." The abbess watched her for a moment longer, then turned and swept away, her robes whispering. The city was waking, but the palace never truly slept. As dawn crept across Chang'an, the sky above the Forbidden City was a deep, bruised indigo, the last of the night's coolness clinging to the air. Wu Zetian stood in the shadow of the Vermilion Gate, the morning's chill biting through her thin silk cloak. Her breath clouded, mingling with the faint scent of incense drifting from a nearby shrine. She pressed gloved fingers to her lips, tasting the faint bitterness of sleep lost and secrets kept. The palace walls loomed above her, red lacquer fading in places, dragon motifs glaring from every beam, as if daring her to remember her place. The stones beneath her slippers were slick with dew, each step a careful negotiation between balance and the urge to run. She could hear the distant clang of a bell, the rhythm of servants sweeping the courtyards, the soft cooing of doves nesting in the eaves. Somewhere, a kitchen boy was chopping ginger, the sharp aroma cutting through the heavier smells of damp earth and old wood lanterns flickered along the covered walkways, their golden light pooling on the flagstones like spilled honey, illuminating the intricate embroidery on her pale blue gown, clouds and cranes, symbols of longevity, each thread a silent promise. Wu's heart thudded, not with fear, but with anticipation she was returning, not as a discarded concubine or a shamed nun, but as a woman with a plan. Her hands trembled slightly, the silk of her sleeves whispering as she smoothed them. She could still feel the rough wool of the convent robes against her skin, the echo of prayers muttered in cold stone halls. But now the palace air was thick with possibility, every breath tasting of hope and danger. There was something about the Forbidden City at sunrise, a feeling that the world, for a brief moment, held its breath. Shadows stretched long and thin, the gardens painted silver and blue. The cherry trees along the southern wall were still bare, their branches black against the sky. But Wu could imagine them in bloom, petals falling like rain. She remembered the first time she had entered these gates, a girl of 14, eyes wide with terror and awe. How many women had been swallowed by these walls, their names forgotten, their ambitions ground to dust beneath the emperor's feet. But she was not that girl anymore. Wu Zetian straightened, drawing in the sharp, metallic scent of the morning. Her mind spun with calculations, Who would greet her? Who would sneer? Who might already be plotting her downfall? The rules of court were written in glances and whispers, in the subtle dance of silk and steel. She would need to be sharper than ever, her tongue as quick as her wits. The gate creaked open. A pair of eunuchs, in crimson tunics, bowed deeply, their faces as blank as river stones. Beyond them, the palace stretched in endless layers. Courtyards, pavilions, corridors veiled in mist. The sounds of the city, vendors hawking rice cakes, oxen lowing, the distant clang of temple bells, were muffled here, as if the world itself conspired to keep the emperor's secrets. As she stepped forward, Wu felt the eyes of the past upon her, the ghosts of concubines, empresses, and servants who had walked these paths before. She wondered if they had felt the same electric thrill, the same coil of dread and longing. She wondered if they had ever dared to dream of more. "You are not a ghost," she told herself. "You are not a shadow. You have come back to claim what is yours." Her pulse quickened. The palace was a maze, but she knew its twists and turns now. The hidden courtyards where secrets were traded, the alcoves where alliances were forged, the silent corners where enemies waited. She would not be lost again. A servant approached, bowing low, the scent of sandalwood rising from his robes. "Lady Wu," he murmured, careful not to meet her eyes. "His Majesty awaits you." Wu's lips curled in a half-smile. The words were simple, but the meaning was not. She was no longer invisible. She was being summoned, not dismissed. She took a steadying breath, feeling the chill of the morning give way to a slow, simmering fire inside her chest. As she followed the servant deeper into the heart of the palace, Wu Zetian allowed herself a single, silent promise. She would not leave this place again, not until the world remembered her name. Let them whisper. Let them fear I have returned. The Hall of Blossoms was a jewel box of color and light, its walls painted with scenes of immortals and phoenixes soaring above waves. Shafts of sunlight pierced the latticed windows, throwing patterns onto the polished floor. The air was heavy with the fragrance of peonies and the musk of ancient wood. Wu Zetian paused at the threshold, her eyes adjusting to the dazzle. Every sense felt sharpened, every detail amplified. The rustle of silk sleeves, the faint click of jade hairpins, the soft hum of conversation layered with tension. Two women stood at the far end of the hall, their backs straight as spears. Empress Wang, draped in imperial yellow, wore her beauty like armor. Her hair was coiled high, pinned with gold lotus blossoms, and her eyes, dark, watchful, missed nothing beside her consort. Xiao's laughter tinkled like wind chimes, but her fingers twisted nervously at her sash, betraying unease. Both watched as Wu approached, their expressions a careful blend of curiosity and disdain. Wu's heart skipped, but her steps did not falter. She let her gaze linger on the Empress's embroidered slippers, the delicate silver clouds on consort Xiao's sleeve, a language of status and rivalry. She could smell the sweet almond oil in their hair, the sharper bite of jealousy beneath their perfume. "Lady Wu," Empress Wang greeted, her voice smooth but edged with frost. "How unexpected to see you here, so soon after your retreat." A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Wu inclined her head, her own smile polite, lips barely parted. "Your Majesty honors me. The world outside the palace is cold and lonely. I am grateful His Majesty has allowed me to return." "We were just discussing the Emperor's health, consort." Xiao stepped forward, her eyes bright, lips painted the color of pomegranate seeds. "He grows weary with the affairs of state. Perhaps you bring him some new diversion." Wu's fingers tightened around her sleeve. The words were harmless on the surface, but each syllable was a barb. She met Consort Xiao's gaze, searching for a crack in her mask. "His Majesty's burdens are many. I wish only to lighten them, as any loyal subject would." A noble sentiment. Empress Wang's laughter was low, almost kind, yet the palace is not a place for simple loyalty. Here, even kindness is suspect. Wu let the silence hang. She watched the way the Empress's hand drifted to her jade necklace, fingers tracing the cool stone. Power, here, was measured in gestures as much as words. She drew herself taller, letting her own presence fill the space. "I have learned much in my absence," Wu replied softly. "The world beyond these walls is full of hardship. I have seen how the common people suffer, how they hunger for justice. Perhaps the palace would benefit from a touch of that humility." A flicker of surprise crossed Empress Wang's face, quickly masked, but not missed. Consort Xiao's smile faltered, her eyes darting to the Empress for guidance. "It is easy to speak of humility, Lady Wu, when one wears silk and dines on pearls." Empress Wang recovered, her voice honeyed. "Do you truly understand the price of compassion?" Wu's mind raced. She remembered the cold stone of the convent, the ache in her bones, the taste of thin gruel on her tongue. She let that memory color her words. "Compassion is not weakness. Your Majesty, it is the strength to endure suffering, and the wisdom to rise above it." A tense silence. The sound of a distant zither drifted in from the garden, the notes trembling in the air. Wu felt the weight of every eye in the hall, searching for fault, for weakness. She steadied herself, letting the memory of her own pain become armor. The Emperor will decide whose counsel he values, consort. Xiao broke the silence, her voice brittle. "Until then, perhaps Lady Wu would care to join us in the Lotus Pavilion. The plum wine is said to be excellent this season." Wu hesitated, reading the invitation for what it was: a test, a trap, or perhaps both. She nodded, her voice calm. "I would be honored." The three women walked together, their footsteps echoing off the marble tiles. The Lotus Pavilion was a riot of color, red lanterns swaying in the breeze, the scent of plum blossoms heavy in the air. Servants poured wine into jade cups, the liquid catching the sunlight, ruby and gold to new beginnings. Empress Wang lifted her cup, her eyes never leaving Wu's face. Wu raised her own cup, the cool stone pressing against her. A heavy, humid dawn pressed itself against the palace walls, draping the forbidden city in a sticky shroud of mist. The air was thick with the scent of summer's decay, overripe plums from the imperial orchards, the faint tang of sweat from the guards, and the earthy musk of wet stone. In the hall of radiant harmony, the red lacquered columns stood silent and cool, their surfaces slick with beads of condensation that caught the pale, watery light. filtering through latticed windows. Lanterns, their silk skins dulled by the damp, swung gently overhead, casting wavering shadows that danced across the polished floor. Wu Zetian stood at the edge of the hall, her bare feet pressing into a woven reed mat that felt rough and grounding beneath her. She wore a robe of deep blue silk, embroidered with tiny cranes in flight, the fabric clinging to her skin in the humid air. Her hair, coiled into a neat chignon and pinned with a single jade comb, was still damp from the morning's hurried bath. Droplets clung to her nape, cool against the heat rising from her body. She drew a slow, measured breath, tasting the bitterness of green tea lingering on her tongue. Somewhere nearby, the distant clatter of kitchen servants echoed through the corridors, mingling with the low, constant thrum of cicadas outside. The world felt suspended, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. Zetian's hands trembled, almost imperceptibly, as she pressed them together in front of her. She could feel the ragged edge of exhaustion behind her eyes. A sleepless night spent pacing the confines of her private chamber, haunted by the memory of her daughter's tiny, still form, the child, barely a month old, gone before she could even learn the shape of her mother's face. Grief was a stone in her gut, heavy and cold, but beneath it burned something fiercer, a molten core of anger and resolve. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and smells of the palace seep into her. The world of the Tang court was a world of masks, of silk and whispers, of glances sharp as knives. Here, every gesture was a message, every word a weapon. She had learned that lesson early, and paid for it in blood and tears. Now, the court was a battlefield, and she was both general and pawn. They think I am broken. They think the loss of my child will shatter me. But pain is a teacher, and I am the best student this palace has ever seen. The memory of Empress Wang's delicate, insincere smile flashed before her mind's eye. The Empress, with her gilded hairpins and soft perfumed hands, had visited her the day before, offering words of comfort that tasted like poison. Zetian had watched her closely, searching for any crack in the mask, any flicker of guilt or fear. Instead, she had found only pity, and beneath that, something colder, triumph. A sudden gust of wind rattled the paper screens, sending a shiver through the hall. Zetian opened her eyes, focusing on the world before her. The time for mourning was past. Now she would act. She would turn her pain into a blade and carve out a place for herself in the heart of the empire. She glanced down at her hands, slender and pale against the dark blue of her robe. They had once been soft, the hands of a girl who read poetry and plucked strings. Now they were the hands of a woman who had learned to fight, to scheme, to endure. What is a mother's love worth in this place? Is it only a weapon, to be wielded or discarded as the game demands? Or is it the last thing that is truly mine? The question lingered, unanswered, as footsteps echoed down the corridor. The day's first audience was about to begin. Zetian straightened her spine, smoothing her robe with careful, practiced hands. She set her face in a mask of serene composure, hiding the storm within outside. The mist began to lift, revealing the blood-red banners of the imperial court snapping in the morning breeze. The game was in motion, and Wu Zetian was ready to play. The Hall of Blossoming Virtue was already alive with tension. Incense curled in delicate ribbons from bronze braziers, filling the air with the scent of sandalwood and camphor. Courtiers in robes of peacock green and gold stood in small clusters, their voices hushed but urgent, eyes darting toward Zetian as she entered. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. Every head turned, some in open curiosity, others with barely concealed suspicion. The loss of her daughter had become the talk of the palace, a story whispered in the shadows of every corridor. Empress Wang stood at the far end of the hall, framed by a screen painted with lotus flowers. She wore a robe of pale pink silk, the color of early cherry blossoms, her hair artfully arranged and adorned with pearls. Beside her stood Consort Xiao, her chief ally, draped in green and gold, her expression cool and unreadable. Zetian moved with deliberate slowness, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The hem of her robe brushed the floor, trailing the faint scent of jasmine oil. She felt the weight of 100 eyes upon her, each gaze a needle pricking her skin. As she approached the Empress and Consort Xiao, she forced herself to smile, a small, controlled movement that barely reached her eyes. "Empress Wang," Zetian said, her voice soft but steady. "Consort Xiao, I thank you both for your concern in these difficult days." Wang inclined her head, the gesture flawless, Lady Wu. "Your loss is a tragedy for us all. The Emperor grieves with you." Zetian studied her rival's face, searching for any sign of guilt. Wang's eyes were dark and unreadable, her hands folded neatly in front of her consort. Xiao, by contrast, watched Zetian with a faint, almost mocking smile. "My grief is my own," Zetian replied, her tone measured, "but I am grateful for your kindness." A silence stretched between them, thick as honey. Zetian could feel the eyes of the court upon her, waiting for the next move. "The palace can be a dangerous place for children, Lady Wu. One must be ever vigilant. Accidents happen so easily." Zetian felt a spike of anger, sharp and sudden. She kept her face neutral, but her hands clenched at her sides. "Indeed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but not all accidents are accidents, are they?" Wang's eyes narrowed. "Just a fraction, Lady Wu. I hope you are not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," Zetian interrupted, her words crisp as frost. "I merely observe that tragedy has a way of striking where one least expects it." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled courtiers. The air felt charged, as if a storm were gathering just beyond the palace walls. Wang's smile faltered, and for the first time, Zetian saw a flicker of uncertainty in her rival's eyes. "Lady Wu," Wang said, her voice trembling ever so slightly, "we are all sisters here. The Emperor expects us to support each other, not to sow discord." Zetian inclined her head, the gesture slow and deliberate. "Of course, Empress unity is the strength of the harem. But unity cannot be built on secrets and lies." Consort Xiao stepped forward, her green robe rustling like leaves in the wind. "Careful, Lady Wu, words have consequences in this place." Zetian met her gaze, unflinching. "So do actions. Consort Xiao, so do actions." A tense silence fell. Zetian could feel the eyes of the court shifting, weighing loyalties, calculating risks. The rules of the game had changed, and everyone knew it. Wang's voice, when it came, was colder than before. "Perhaps it is best, Lady Wu, if you take some time to recover. The Emperor has many concerns, and your presence may only add to his burdens." Zetian felt a surge of defiance. "My lord husband is wise. He knows the value of every voice in his court, including mine." A muscle twitched in Wang's jaw. She glanced at consort Xiao, who offered a small, secretive smile. The conversation was over, but the battle had only just begun. As Zetian turned to leave, she caught the eye of a young maidservant, Mei, a girl she had trusted since her return to the palace. Mei's eyes were wide with fear, but also with something else: determination. Zetian paused, leaning in to whisper, "Meet me in the southern gardens at dusk. Bring only those you trust." Mei nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the sleeve of Zetian's robe. "Yes, my lady." As Zetian walked away, the murmur of voices rose behind her, a river of rumors and half-truth. The Lioness Rises. The dawn arrived shrouded in a heavy amber mist, as if the old city itself wished to hide its secrets for a few moments longer. Beyond the latticed windows of Wu Zetian's private chamber, the world was blurred. Rooftops and gnarled cypress trees faded into a wash of gold and gray. The air was thick with the scent of rain-damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of incense burning somewhere deeper in the palace. Outside, a distant bell tolled, its mournful note echoing through the courtyards and stone corridors, stirring the palace from uneasy dreams. Inside, the chamber was a world apart, a cocoon of silk and shadow. The silk hangings, dyed crimson and embroidered with twisting dragons, rippled slightly in the draught from a half-open door. Lanterns burned low, their light flickering across the polished lacquer of a writing table, the gleam of gold-threaded cushions, and the cool, pale skin of Wu Zetian herself. She sat upright on the edge of her bed, spine straight as a spear, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her robe was the color of pomegranate seeds, heavy with embroidery that scratched at her wrists and neck. The weight of her hair, pinned with jade combs and pearls, tugged at her scalp. Every inch of her body ached, but she would not show it. Not today. Her heart thudded like a captive bird against her ribs. Today, the world would change. Today, the last barriers would fall, and she would claim the title of Empress, no longer just a favored consort, no longer a shadow in the Emperor's halls. She was about to step onto the dragon throne, a place no woman had ever stood before. A cold bead of sweat traced its way down the nape of her neck. She pressed her hands tighter, willing herself to stillness. The air, thick with the musk of sandalwood and the faint, sharp scent of ink, seemed to press in on her. What would they say of her years from now? Would they curse her name, whispering of poison and betrayal? Or would they remember her as the woman who dared to reach for the sun, who bent the world to her will? A servant girl entered quietly, her footsteps muffled by woven reed mats. She bowed low, her eyes never rising above the hem of Wu Zetian's robe. "Your Majesty, the attendants are ready." Lady Shang is waiting in the antechamber. Wu Zetian nodded, her voice steady, though her throat felt tight. Bring her in, and prepare the ceremonial dress. Today must be perfect. The girl withdrew, leaving the door ajar. Through the gap, Wu Zetian caught a whiff of jasmine tea and the earthy bitterness of medicinal herbs, reminders of the Emperor's fragile health, and of the dangers that still lurked in every shadowed hallway. She stood, the silk of her robe whispering against her skin. Her bare feet sank into the thick pile of the rug, embroidered with phoenixes rising from flames. The touch grounded her, reminding her of the world she had clawed her way through. Childhood lessons in the dust of her father's house, the cold stone floors of the convent, the treacherous beauty of the palace outside. The bell tolled again, joined by the distant clatter of armor and the low murmur of voices. The city was waking, the world was watching. Wu Zetian drew a deep breath, tasting anticipation and fear on her tongue. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the sounds and scents of the morning settle around her like armor. When she opened them, her gaze was clear and sharp as a blade. Today, she would become Empress, or she would be destroyed. Trying, Lady Shang entered with a rustle of silk, her face composed but her eyes darting with nervous energy. She wore the pale blue of a high-ranking attendant, the sleeves of her robe edged with silver clouds. Behind her, 2 maids carried the ceremonial regalia, a robe of imperial yellow, so bright it seemed to glow in the dim chamber, and a headdress heavy with pearls and gold. "Your Majesty," Lady Shang murmured, bowing deeply. Her hands trembled as she set down the lacquered tray bearing the Empress's seal. Wu Zetian watched her, noting the tension in the woman's jaw, the way her gaze flickered to the door. "You are troubled, Lady Shang. Speak." Lady Shang hesitated, fingers twisting in the sash at her waist. "There have been whispers, Majesty. Empress Wang's supporters grow bold. Some say she has appealed to the Dowager Empress, begging for clemency." Wu Zetian's lips curled in a small, cold smile. "Clemency? After all that has passed? The court is not a place for mercy, Lady Shang. You know that as well as I." The attendant swallowed, her cheeks flushing. "Still, there are those who believe." "Belief is a dangerous thing," Wu Zetian interrupted, her tone soft but edged with steel. "Belief can topple thrones. Today, I will show them what is real." As the maids approached, Wu Zetian lifted her arms, allowing them to slide the golden robe over her shoulders. The fabric was stiff, embroidered with dragons and clouds, the threads catching the light like fire. The weight was immense, pressing down on her shoulders, but she straightened her spine, refusing to bend. Lady Shang stepped forward, hands shaking as she adjusted the collar. "Forgive me, Majesty, but there are rumors." "Enough." Wu Zetian's voice was low, but it carried the promise of thunder. "Rumors are the tools of the weak. Today, we will deal in facts." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the soft click of hairpins and the rustle of silk. Wu Zetian glanced at her reflection in a polished bronze mirror. Her face was pale and composed, her eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment she saw not herself, but every woman who had been cast aside, every concubine and servant who had dreamed of more. The door creaked open, and a new figure entered, Emperor Gaozong himself. He was thinner than she remembered, his skin sallow, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. His robe was deep indigo, the dragon emblem on his chest faded with age and wear. He moved carefully, each step measured, as if the floor might shift beneath him. "Majesty," he said, his voice strained but warm. He reached for her hand, his fingers cool and trembling. "Are you ready?" Wu Zetian squeezed his hand, feeling the brittle bones beneath his skin. "I am. Are you?" He managed a weak smile. "We have come too far to falter now." Lady Shang and the maids withdrew, sensing the need for privacy. The chamber seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with the scent of incense and the distant sour tang of illness. Gaozong studied her face, searching for something. Fear, perhaps, or regret. "You know what they will say, that I am bewitched, that you have poisoned my mind, or worse." Wu Zetian met his gaze, her own steady and unflinching. "Let them say what they will. The truth is, you chose me. You saw what I could do, what I could be." He nodded, though his eyes were clouded with doubt. "They will not forgive you, Wu. Not now, not ever." She felt a flicker of something, pain, perhaps, or loneliness. "I do not need their forgiveness, only your trust." He hesitated, then drew her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You have it, but I fear for you." She smiled, a small fierce thing. "Fear is the shadow of power. I have lived with it all my life." A silence stretched between them, heavy with words unspoken. Wu Zetian felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. As real as the robe on her shoulders, Gaozong broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you be merciful, Wu, when the time comes?" She looked away, her gaze falling on the lacquered tray and the Empress's seal. A small, unassuming object, yet the symbol of everything she had fought for. Mercy is a luxury for the safe and the secure. I have never been either. He sighed, releasing her hand. "Then may the heavens watch over us both." Another pause, filled with the sound of distant bells and the soft patter of rain on the tiled roof. Wu Zetian's heart pounded, each beat echoing with memory and fear. Lady Shang re-entered, her face pale. "The council awaits, Majesty. It is time." Wu Zetian nodded, her jaw set. She turned to Gaozong, her voice steady. "Whatever happens, remember this. I did not come this far to be caged or broken. I will be Empress, or I will be nothing." Gaozong nodded, pride and worry mingling in his eyes. "Then go. Show them what a woman can become." Wu Zetian swept from the chamber, the golden robe trailing behind her, like a comet's tail, Empress Ascendant. Dawn crept into the imperial palace with a hush, as if the city itself dared not disturb the Empress's rest. But Wu Zetian had not slept. She stood alone on the balcony of her private chamber, the stone balustrade cool beneath her fingertips. A fine mist drifted over the glazed tiles of the Forbidden City's rooftops, softening the sharp lines of the palace and blurring the crimson lacquer of the eaves. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of incense from distant altars somewhere below. A peacock shrieked, its cry echoing through the stillness, sharp as a knife slicing silk. Wu's eyes, dark and wide, scanned the horizon where the first pale gold of morning pressed against the stormy blue. Her long hair, unbound, spilled over her shoulders like a river of ink. She shivered, not from cold, but from something colder still that had settled inside her since last night's council. Her robes, heavy with embroidery, pressed against her skin, the gold threads scratching where they met her collarbone. The weight of the dragon medallion at her chest, gift from Emperor Gaozong, seemed heavier than ever. She pressed her palm to her heart. Beneath her fingers, the silk was damp with sweat. Her pulse fluttered, quick and unsteady, as if her body already sensed the dangers that would chase her through this day. The world smelled of rain and resin, of old wood and secrets. She tasted the bitterness of last night's tea still on her tongue, mingled with the metallic tang of fear. In the distance, bells began to toll, their deep, resonant notes rolling over the palace grounds and calling the city to life. The sound vibrated through her bones. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, just for a moment, on the current of her thoughts. How many mornings had begun like this? Her heart pounding, her mind racing, the world outside her window both beautiful and treacherous. She thought of the court's endless corridors, lined with whispering courtiers and painted screens, each one a mask for ambition or betrayal. She thought of the emperor, her partner and shield, but also a man grown more fragile with each passing season. Gaozong had coughed blood again last night. The memory of it, dark and sudden on his sleeve, haunted her. She had pressed a cloth to his lips, her hands steady, her voice gentle. Even as panic clawed at her insides, she had learned to hide her fear behind a smile, to offer comfort while calculating every move. For in this palace, love was a weapon, and mercy a trap. She opened her eyes. The sky was brightening, and the city below began to stir. Servants moved like shadows across the courtyards, their slippers whispering against the flagstones. Somewhere, a cook's knife chopped vegetables on a wooden board, the sound sharp and rhythmic. The tang of ginger and garlic drifted up on the breeze. Wu Zetian inhaled deeply, drawing the scents and sounds into herself. She would need every sense awake, every nerve sharpened, to survive another day. Today, she was not just the emperor's consort, not just the empress. She was co-ruler of China, and every step she took would be watched, weighed, and judged. A sudden gust of wind lifted the edge of her robe, brushing cool air against her ankles. She clutched the balustrade tighter. Let them come. Let them try. Inside her chest, fear and excitement tangled together. Old enemies, old friends. She could not tell which would win. She turned from the balcony as the palace bell tolled again, its sound deeper now, more insistent. The day had begun, and with it, the dance of power. What price will I pay today, and what price will they? The hall of mental cultivation was alive with tension. Light filtered through latticed windows, painting shifting patterns on the polished floor. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and the faint bitterness of ink. Ministers in embroidered robes clustered along the walls, their voices low, their eyes darting like startled fish. Wu Zetian entered with measured steps, her robe trailing behind her in a shimmer of crimson and gold. At her side walked Emperor Gaozong, his face pale but determined, each step betraying the effort it cost him. On the dais, two figures waited, Chancellor Xu Jingzong and General Li Ji, both bowed deeply as Wu and Gaozong approached. "Your Majesties, the morning council awaits your wisdom." Wu inclined her head, her gaze never leaving Xu's face. She could smell the faint tang of his perfume, a blend of camphor and citrus, sharp and calculated. General Li Ji's armor creaked as he straightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Let us begin." As the council discussed the latest rebellion in the south, Wu watched the faces around her. Xu Jingzong's eyes flickered with calculation. Li Ji's jaw tightened with every mention of unrest. The ministers' voices rose and fell, weaving a tapestry of anxiety and ambition. The rebels grow bold because they sense weakness. We must act swiftly, or the rot will spread. Your Majesty, perhaps a show of mercy would... Mercy is wasted on those who would see the throne toppled. We must remind them who rules. Xu bowed his head, but his lips pressed into a thin line. As you wish, Your Majesty. I can lead the Imperial Guard myself. Crush them before they gain ground. Wu studied him. And if they have allies within the court, General, will you crush them as well? I serve the throne, Empress, no matter where the enemy hides. The council fell silent. Wu let the silence linger, watching sweat bead on Xu's brow, the way Li Ji's hand tightened on his sword. She felt Gaozong's gaze on her, searching for reassurance. She shifted, the silk of her robe whispering against the lacquered chair. We will send the guard, but we must also root out traitors here. I want a list of every minister who has spoken with the southern envoys. Xu's eyes widened, just a fraction. Of course, Your Majesty. Wu leaned forward, her voice soft but unyielding. Loyalty is not proven by words, Chancellor, only by action. A hush fell. Wu felt the weight of their fear, tasted it in the air, bitter and electric. She remembered her father's lessons. The sharpest blade is the one they never see coming. As the council ended, Xu lingered. He approached Wu, bowing low. Empress, may I speak privately? She nodded, signaling her attendants to withdraw. The hall emptied, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps and the scent of burning incense. Yu straightened, his eyes wary. There are rumors, Your Majesty. Some say you move too quickly, that your power grows, dangerous. Wu smiled, the gesture slow and deliberate. Dangerous to whom, Chancellor? To traitors? Or to those who cannot keep pace? He hesitated, hands clasped tightly. I serve the Empire, as always. But some fear the old ways are being swept aside. She met his gaze, unblinking. The old ways kept women silent, and the Empire weak. I will not apologize for strength. Chu's lips trembled. There are those who would resist. She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume, jasmine and wood smoke, filling the space between them. Let them. But be sure, Chancellor, that you are not among them. He bowed again, lower this time. Of course, Your Majesty. As he retreated, Wu let out a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly, hidden in her sleeves. She glanced at Gaozong, who watched her with a mixture of pride and fear. You are fiercer than any general. Wu's heart twisted. I must be, or we will lose everything. He reached for her hand, his palm cool and dry. I trust you, Zetian. She squeezed his hand, feeling the bones beneath his skin, so fragile. Then let us stand together, no matter what comes. He nodded, but she saw the shadow behind his eyes, the fear that he might not always be by her side. The doors opened, and their attendants re-entered, bearing trays of tea and sweet rice cakes. The scent of jasmine and honey filled the room. Momentarily masking the bitterness in Wu's heart, she sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. But even as she drank, she felt the eyes of the court upon her, watching, waiting, judging. Every gesture, every word, was a test I will not break. Not for anyone. The dawn crept over Chang'an like a silk veil, pale light spilling through the frosted latticework of the palace windows. Outside, the city still slumbered, but within the crimson walls of the Forbidden City, the world was already in motion. Wu Zetian stood at the edge of her private courtyard, the hem of her midnight blue robe trailing along the cold, polished stones. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and distant incense, tinged with a faint metallic tang that always seemed to linger in the palace. Iron from the armor of the night watch, or perhaps the blood that had been spilled in the pursuit of power. She drew in a slow breath, feeling the cold settle deep in her lungs. In the hush before the day's chaos, every sound was magnified. The caw of a distant crow, the faint rustle of silk as a servant hurried past, the soft drip of water from the eaves above her fingers, pale and slender, curled around the edge of the lacquered railing, feeling the smooth, chill wood beneath her skin. The world felt poised on a knife's edge, and she with it. A distant bell tolled, a low, mournful note that vibrated through the misty morning. It was the signal for the palace gates to open, for ministers and eunuchs and concubines to flood into the day's business. But here, in this fragile bubble of quiet, Wu Zetian allowed herself a moment of stillness. The weight of her hair, pulled up in the elaborate coils befitting her rank, tugged at her scalp. Gold pins pressed against her skull, cool and heavy, reminders of the crown she wore even when the world could not see it. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds and smells of the palace settle around her like a second skin. Underneath the sharpness of winter, she caught the faint sweetness of plum blossoms, forced to bloom early by the will of gardeners who knew her tastes. The scent was a memory of spring, a promise that the world could be remade to suit her desires. But nothing came without cost. Every morning, she woke with the knowledge that her husband, Emperor Gaozong, grew weaker. The man who had once been her ally, her lover, her shield against the daggers of the court, now lay in his chambers, coughing blood into silk handkerchiefs. The physicians spoke in whispers, their faces grave. They brewed their bitter teas and burned their pungent herbs, but the emperor's eyes grew more clouded with each passing day. And so the burden of the empire settled heavier on Wu Zetian's shoulders. She ruled from behind the curtain, literally, for custom dictated that a woman could not be seen presiding over the court. Instead, she sat behind a screen of embroidered silk, her voice carrying through the gauzy fabric, issuing orders that shaped the fate of millions. She opened her eyes, staring at the pale sky. The world outside the palace was restless. Famine gnawed at the countryside, bandits prowled the trade roads, and whispers of rebellion drifted in from the western provinces. Inside, the court was a nest of vipers, ministers who resented her power, concubines who plotted in the shadows, eunuchs whose loyalties shifted with the wind. Wu Zetian's pulse thrummed with a familiar mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had clawed her way from obscurity to the highest seat in the land, and yet every day was a battle, a constant test of her will, her cunning, her ruthlessness. She could not afford to falter, not now, not ever. A faint breeze stirred the edge of her robe, bringing with it the scent of ash from the morning's incense offerings. She glanced down at her hands, noting the fine lines that had begun to appear along her knuckles. Power carved its own marks, she thought. Every decision, every sacrifice, left a scar. A movement caught her eye. Across the courtyard, a pair of young servant girls hurried past, their heads bowed, arms laden with trays of porcelain and steaming rice. The sight was almost comforting in its ordinariness, a reminder that life, for most, continued in a cycle of small labors and simple joys. But for Wu Zetian, there was no such comfort. She belonged to the world of shadows and silk, of whispered threats and hidden knives. She was the Empress in all but name, and soon, perhaps, she would be more. A sudden cough echoed from the inner chambers, a harsh, wet sound that made her flinch despite herself. Gaozong, the sound of his suffering, was a knife in her heart, but she could not allow herself to crumble. Not now, she straightened, drawing the cold air deep into her lungs. The day awaited her, with all its dangers and possibilities. She would meet it, as she always had, with iron hidden beneath the softest silk. The hall of auspicious governance was alive with morning light. Sunbeams slanted through the high windows, illuminating the swirling dust and casting golden patterns across the jade floor tiles. The air was thick with the mingled scents of sandalwood, ink, and fresh rice porridge. Ministers clustered in small knots, their voices low and urgent, while eunuchs glided between them, bearing scrolls and messages. Wu Zetian entered with deliberate grace, her robes trailing behind her like a river of midnight and gold. Every eye flicked to her, some with deference, some with resentment, a few with undisguised fear. She felt their gazes like a cloak of fire, but she kept her head high, her posture unyielding. At her side walked Chancellor Shu Jingzong, a slim man with a fox's smile and eyes that missed nothing. He bowed deeply as she approached the dais, his voice low and respectful. "Your Majesty, the council awaits your wisdom." She inclined her head, feeling the weight of her crown pins shift. Let them approach. As the ministers filed into place, Wu Zetian's gaze swept the room. Among them stood Minister Wei, a grizzled veteran whose loyalty to the old order was well known, and Lady Shangguan, a sharp-eyed noblewoman whose family ties made her both valuable and dangerous. The tension in the room was as thick as the morning mist. Chancellor Shu cleared his throat, The matter of the grain tax, Your Majesty. The provinces clamor for relief. Famine grips the north. Minister Wei stepped forward, his voice gravelly. The Treasury cannot spare more, Your Majesty. To lower the tax would invite ruin. Wu Zetian studied him, noting the way his hands trembled slightly, the sweat beading at his brow. She let the silence stretch, savoring the discomfort. And yet, to ignore their suffering would invite rebellion. Which would you prefer, Minister Wei? An empty treasury, or a burning empire? He hesitated, eyes flicking to Chancellor Shu, then to Lady Shangguan. There must be another way. Perhaps stricter rationing, or increased levies on the merchant guilds. Lady Shangguan's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. The merchants are already restive. Your Majesty squeeze them further, and they may close the markets altogether. Wu Zetian felt the familiar dance of politics begin, the careful weighing of words, the subtle threats hidden behind polite phrases. She leaned forward, her fingers drumming softly on the arm of her chair. Tell me, Lady Shangguan, what would you do in my place? The noblewoman's eyes glittered. I would seek new revenues, perhaps through trade with the western regions, or by reducing the number of idle officials in the capital. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Minister Wei bristled, his shoulders stiffening. Such measures would weaken our administration. The capital must remain strong. Wu Zetian watched the interplay, her mind whirring. She saw the threads of ambition and fear that bound these people to her and to each other. She thought of the hungry peasants in the north, the bandits preying on caravans, the merchants counting coins with nervous fingers. She turned to Chancellor Shu. How fares the Emperor this morning? Shu's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine concern passing over his features. He is resting, Your Majesty. The physicians say his condition is stable, but he cannot rule. Wu Zetian finished for him, her tone flat. And so the burden falls to me. A heavy silence fell. Wu Zetian felt the eyes of the court upon her, some hopeful, some hostile. She let her gaze linger on each face in turn, reading their secrets in the twitch of a mouth, the clench of a fist. At last she spoke. The grain tax will be lowered for the northern provinces. The merchant guilds will be consulted, not coerced. Idle officials will be reviewed for necessity. We will not starve our people, nor will we weaken our city. Is this understood? A chorus of murmured assent filled the hall, but Wu Zetian saw the dissent in their eyes. She knew that every decision she made created enemies as well as allies. Lady Shangguan stepped closer, her voice low. Your Majesty is wise, but mercy can be mistaken for weakness. Weakness is a word that echoed long after the council dispersed. A hush fell over the imperial city, so deep it seemed even the wind dared not disturb the morning. The first light of dawn crept across the sprawling roofs of Chang'an, each glazed tile glistening with dew, catching the pale gold of the rising sun beneath those rooftops. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the faint, ever-present tang of lacquered wood and old parchment. In the gardens, the last of the night's rain clung to the peony petals, their deep crimson bleeding into the mist, as if the earth itself had drawn a breath and held it. Wu Zetian stood in the heart of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, its vastness echoing the emptiness she felt in her bones. The cool marble floor pressed against the soles of her feet, grounding her in the present, even as her heart hammered like a war drum. The hall was a cavern of silence, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the rhythmic drip of water from the eaves. Shadows stretched along the carved pillars, their dragons twisting upward, scales catching the faintest glimmers of light. She inhaled deeply, the perfume of sandalwood and chrysanthemum oil, mingling with the sharper, metallic scent of bronze censers. Her hands, hidden within the embroidered sleeves of her imperial robe, trembled just enough to betray her. The silk was heavy, woven with golden thread that shimmered with each breath she took. Each movement a quiet announcement of her power and the burden it carried. The robe's collar brushed her jaw, stiff and unfamiliar, a constant reminder that she now wore the regalia of the Son of Heaven, except she was no sun. The weight of the phoenix crown pressed against her brow, its delicate pearls and kingfisher feathers trembling with every heartbeat. The crown was beautiful, but it felt like a cage. Wu Zetian's gaze drifted upward to the high windows, where the dawn's light filtered through latticed screens, painting her face with a mosaic of gold and shadow. She could taste the anticipation in the air, sharp as ginger, sweet as honeyed tea, bitter as wormwood. Behind her, the hall's vast doors stood open, framing the world she now ruled. In the distance, the city's waking sounds drifted in. The clatter of market stalls, the muffled calls of vendors, the low chant of monks from a nearby temple. Yet inside these walls, all was still. The silence was not peace. It was the hush before a storm, the moment when the world holds its breath. She closed her eyes and let her thoughts tumble out, raw and unguarded. Is this what victory tastes like? Or is it only the beginning of another war? Every muscle in her body was taut, ready for flight or battle. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of triumph and terror. She remembered the feel of Gao Zong's hand in hers, warm and reassuring, the steady anchor that had kept her grounded as she navigated the treacherous waters of court intrigue. Now, his absence was a chill at her back, a shadow that stretched longer than the pillars of the hall. The Emperor was gone. She was alone at the pinnacle of power, a place where the air was thin, and every misstep could mean ruin. Wu Zetian opened her eyes, forcing herself to stand tall. The imperial robe pooled around her feet, a river of red and gold. She could feel the eyes of the court officials, even though they waited in the antechamber, their whispers like the rustling of silk in the wind. Some would kneel, others would seethe. All would watch, waiting for her to falter. Let them watch. Let them see what a woman can become. Her pulse steadied. The scent of jasmine floated from the gardens beyond, mingling with the sharper tang of ink and parchment that clung to the air. She drew herself up, spine straight as a spear, and prepared to step forward into history, a history she would write with her own hand. The heavy doors groaned as they swung wider, sunlight streaming in to illuminate the polished floor. The court assembled in two neat rows, their robes a sea of color, sable, vermilion, indigo, all embroidered with the sigils of their houses. The air was thick with the scent of camphor and sweat, as nervous ministers and generals awaited the new order of things. Two figures stepped forward from the crowd, their movements precise, their faces unreadable. The first was Chancellor Pei Yan, his beard as black as lacquer, his eyes sharp and calculating. His robe was understated, but the jade clasp at his throat proclaimed his rank, a signal to all that he was a man of consequence. Beside him, Princess Taiping, Wu Zetian's own daughter, glided forward, her silk gown whispering with every step. Her eyes, so like Zetian's, dark and deep, flickered with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Your Majesty, the council awaits your command. Pei Yan bowed low, his voice smooth as oiled wood. Wu Zetian inclined her head, her gaze lingering on Pei Yan's clasped hands. They trembled, just slightly. Fear or anticipation? She could almost taste his anxiety, bitter as burnt tea. Chancellor Pei, Princess Taiping, today we do what has never been done. Mother, the world will tremble. They will not yield easily. Princess Taiping's lips curled in a faint, knowing smile. Zetian's fingers curled inside her sleeves, nails digging into her palms. Nothing worth having is ever yielded freely, she replied, her words a blade sheathed in velvet. She glanced at Pei Yan, who shifted his weight from foot to foot, eyes darting to the assembled officials. Your Majesty, the traditions. Pei Yan cleared his throat, bowing again. Traditions are made by those who dare today. The dragon throne passes not to a son, but to a woman. If the heavens disapprove, let them send thunder. Zetian interrupted, her gaze hard as jade. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the hall, quickly stifled. The tension was palpable. As sharp as the edge of a sword, Zetian could smell the fear in the air. Old men clinging to the past, young courtiers hungry for change. The court had always been a stage, but today the script was hers alone. Mother, the generals are restless. Some whisper of rebellion in the provinces. They say a woman cannot hold the mandate of heaven. Princess Taiping stepped closer, her perfume a blend of lotus and musk. Then let them come. I have weathered storms, fiercer than their words. Zetian met her daughter's gaze, searching for doubt. She saw only steel. Your Majesty, the officials demand a sign. They say the rites must be observed. The ancestral tablets. Pei Yan's hands twisted in his sleeves. The ancestors will witness a new age. Prepare the rites. I will offer incense myself. Zetian's voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the hall. A hush fell. Pei Yan's jaw worked, as if he wished to protest, but he bowed instead. As you command, Your Majesty. You are not afraid? Princess Taiping's eyes glittered. Fear is a luxury I cannot afford. Not now. Zetian's lips twitched. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with all that was unspoken. Taiping reached out, her hand brushing Zetian's sleeve. A fleeting gesture, quickly withdrawn. Do you remember when you taught me to ride, Mother? You said the only way to tame a wild horse was to become wilder still. And you never fell, did you? Zetian smiled, the memory warming her. Not when you were watching. Taiping's voice softened. The moment was broken by the shuffling of feet and the muted clatter of jade tablets. Pei Yan gestured to the waiting ministers, who knelt in unison, their foreheads pressed to the floor. The sound echoed through the hall, a wave of submission, or was it fear? Zetian stepped forward, her robe whispering across the marble. She could feel the eyes of every official, every servant, every guard. Some looked at her with awe, others with barely concealed hatred. She saw the flicker of rebellion in the eyes of General Zhang, his fists clenched at his sides. She saw hope in the faces of the palace maids, who stood straighter than they ever had before. "The proclamation is ready, Your Majesty. Will you?" Pei Yan's voice trembled. "I will speak," Zetian said, silencing him with a glance. She turned to face the assembly, her heart pounding in her chest. The decree was parchment, but her words would be iron. She let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. The hall was alive with anticipation, the rustle of silk, the creak of bamboo floorboards, the faint scent of anxiety. She drew a breath, the taste of jasmine and ink sharp on her tongue. "I, Wu Zetian, claim the Mand." The night in Luoyang fell heavy and close, as if the sky itself pressed down upon the city's ancient bones. In the imperial palace, the darkness was thick and restless. More than the mere absence of light, it was a living thing, breathing in the corners and shifting with the flicker of each lantern. Rain had come at dusk, tapping first at the lacquered eaves, then drumming harder, until the air was scented with wet earth and the bitter tang of pine resin from the palace gardens. Now, as the hour of the rat approached, a hush had settled, broken only by the distant rhythmic splash of water dripping from the carved dragon's mouth on the eaves outside. Wu Zetian stood alone in her private chamber, the room awash in the gold-red glow of a single oil lamp. Its flame danced and guttered, casting elongated shadows that crawled across the jade tiles and up the painted walls. She pressed one hand to the cold window lattice, her palm tingling from the chill that crept through the wood. Beyond the glass, the world was a blur. Fog rising from the rain-soaked courtyards, lanterns bobbing like trapped fireflies as guards made their rounds. The scent in the room was a swirl of old sandalwood, the sharpness of ink, and the faint metallic tang of her own sweat. Her robe, heavy with embroidered peonies and lined with sable, felt like both armor and shroud. The silk was smooth beneath her fingers, but its weight reminded her of the burdens she wore invisibly. The crown, the secrets, the ever-watchful eyes of the court. She turned from the window, heart pounding in her chest, not with fear, but with a restless vigilance that never seemed to ease. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, the ache in her back, where the day's anxieties had settled. Even her feet, bare against the cold floor, seemed alert, as if ready to carry her into flight or battle at a moment's notice. In the silence, the ticking of her own pulse was loud. Wu Zetian closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, letting the damp air fill her lungs. There was a taste to it, acrid, alive, tinged with the ghost of incense from the ancestor hall. She wondered if the spirits of emperors past lingered in these halls, watching her, judging her, waiting for her to falter. She was no longer the clever girl from the provinces, nor the trembling concubine who had once knelt at another woman's feet. She was emperor now, no matter how many whispered that a woman could not truly rule. Yet tonight, the weight of power pressed against her ribs like a stone. She felt exposed, as if every shadow in the palace hid a dagger, every smile concealed a lie. Her mind spun with the news brought to her that afternoon. Word of another plot, this time among her own kin, cousins, ministers, even her sons. Suspicions tangled together like the roots of the ancient Wu-Tong trees in the garden. She remembered the look on Minister Zhang's face as he bowed low, his voice steady, but his eyes darting like fish in muddy water. Your Majesty, there are whispers in the inner court, whispers that reach even the outer gates. Wu Zetian's lips curled in a bitter smile. Whispers, there were always whispers, but lately they sounded more like the hiss of serpents, venomous and near. She moved to the lacquered table where a scroll lay open, its characters neat and black as crow feathers, names, accusations, warnings. She traced the lines with her finger, feeling the paper's roughness, the ink's slight ridge. Each name was a thread in the web she'd spun, and each could become a noose. Her thoughts twisted back on themselves. Who could she trust? Was loyalty even possible, or was it only fear that kept her court in line? She remembered the teachings of her childhood, the stories of wise rulers and just emperors, but those tales seemed as distant as the moon. In this world, trust was a luxury, one she could not afford. She crossed to the mirror, its bronze surface dulled by candlelight. Her reflection stared back, a face both familiar and strange. The high, arching brows, the mouth set in a line of resolve, the eyes, dark, watchful, and unblinking power, had carved new lines into her skin, sharpened her gaze, made her a creature of both beauty and menace. She touched her own cheek, feeling the coolness of her skin, the subtle tremor in her fingers. How many more nights like this? How many more betrayals before dawn? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. The palace seemed to shudder. As if in answer, Wu Zetian straightened her spine, letting the cold seep into her bones and harden her resolve. She was emperor. She could not afford to be afraid. Not tonight, not ever. The lamp sputtered, casting a brief, wild flare of light. In that moment, the room seemed to expand and contract, as if the shadows themselves were breathing. Wu Zetian stood in the center, alone and unyielding, her heart a drumbeat in the silence, her mind already turning to the battles she would fight before morning broke. The hush of the night was broken by a low knock at the chamber door, a pattern both familiar and cautious. Wu Zetian did not flinch, but her eyes narrowed, scanning the room for anything out of place. She motioned for her attendant, Li Shun, a slender woman in pale blue silk, to open the door. Li Shun's footsteps were soft, her presence like a calming breeze in the charged air. She slid the door open just enough to admit the visitor. Minister Zhang Yiji, one of Wu Zetian's most trusted, yet lately most scrutinized, advisors. Zhang's robes were dark, the color of storm clouds, trimmed with subtle gold thread. He bowed deeply, the scent of rain and ink clinging to him. "Your Majesty," he murmured, eyes lowered, but Wu Zetian saw the quick flicker of apprehension in his face. "Rise, Minister Jiang. Speak." He straightened, smoothing his robe with trembling hands. "There has been movement in the eastern wing, near the quarters of Prince Li Dan. Guards report strangers, servants whose faces are unfamiliar, and messages passed in the night." Li Shun hovered at Wu Zetian's side, her hands folded, eyes darting between the Empress and the minister. Wu Zetian caught the subtle shift in Li Shun's posture, a tightening of the shoulders, a tension in her jaw. Even the loyalist could be shaken by the scent of conspiracy. "Have you questioned these servants?" Wu Zetian asked, folding her arms. The silk of her robe rustled softly, a whisper against the silence. Jiang hesitated, his gaze flickering to Li Shun, then back to Wu Zetian. "We have detained two. They claim ignorance, but one bore a jade token, marked with the seal of the Prince of Wei." Wu Zetian's eyes hardened. The Prince of Wei, her own son, Li Xian. The taste in her mouth soured, as if she'd bitten into a plum that was not yet ripe. She stepped closer to Jiang, her shadow falling across his face. "And what do you believe, Minister?" He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Your Majesty, I believe the court is restless. There are those who whisper that the mandate of heaven is slipping, that a woman cannot hold the dragon throne without inviting chaos." Li Shun drew a sharp breath. Wu Zetian felt the heat rising in her chest, anger prickling along her skin. She paced to the window, her footsteps echoing on the cold tiles, and stared out into the rain-streaked night. The garden lanterns cast trembling reflections in the puddles, turning the world upside down. They forget that it was I who held this empire together when their fathers would have let it burn. They forget the price I have paid for every inch of ground. "Your Majesty," the people in the city, they speak your name with both fear and awe. No one can doubt your strength. But perhaps it is time to show mercy, to draw your family closer, not drive them away. Wu Zetian turned, fixing Li Shun with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. Mercy. Mercy is a knife that finds its way to one's own heart. I have seen what happens to those who trust too easily. Zhang bristled, his hands knotting in his sleeves. "Your Majesty, if I may, Prince Li Xian is still your son. If he is plotting, it may be out of fear for his own life, not malice against you." A silence fell, heavy as wet velvet. The only sound was the distant roll of thunder. Like a drum beat from the heavens, Wu Zetian's mind raced. The first chill of autumn crept through the vermilion corridors of the imperial palace, curling around the carved eaves and drifting in low, silvery mists over the stone courtyards. Morning light filtered through the latticework windows, delicate as old silk, painting the polished floor with shifting patterns of gold and shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of chrysanthemums, bitter, bright, and faintly medicinal, mingling with the earthy tang of damp leaves scattered by the wind. Wu Zetian sat propped against a mound of embroidered cushions, her silhouette framed by the gauzy drapes of her bedchamber. Age had carved its story into her bones. Her hands, once quick and strong, trembled as she lifted a porcelain cup to her lips. The tea was hot and fragrant, but she barely tasted it. Her tongue felt thick and heavy, her mouth dry despite the steam rising from the cup. She could hear the distant clatter of servants sweeping the flagstones, the low hum of voices in the outer hall, and closer, her own breath, shallow and uneven, like a bird fluttering in a cage. The room, though grand, felt oppressively close. Gold-threaded tapestries hung on the walls, their scenes of dragons and phoenixes flickering in the shifting light. The lacquered screens glinted with mother-of-pearl. Yet for all its splendor, the chamber was filled with the faint, musty odor of old incense and the medicinal sharpness of dried herbs. Angelica root, licorice, and ginseng laid out in neat bowls for her endless treatments. Zetian's body ached as if the weight of the empire pressed down upon her. Her joints throbbed with each movement. She drew her robe closer, a heavy garment of crimson and black, lined with sable fur, the fabric soft, yet unyielding against her skin. It was the robe of an emperor, a garment few women had ever worn, and never before as a sovereign in her own right. The gold-threaded dragons curled across the sleeves, their eyes catching the light, fierce and knowing. She gazed through the open window, watching the golden leaves tumble from the ginkgo trees in the palace gardens. The sound of their fall was almost imperceptible, a soft hush beneath the distant cawing of crows. The sky was a pale, bruised blue, streaked with the smoke of cooking fires from the city beyond the walls. Zetian's mind was sharper than her body. She felt the familiar ache of vigilance behind her eyes, the old habit of watching, listening, calculating. The empire she had forged, through blood, cunning, and relentless will, was still hers, but its boundaries were growing fragile. She could sense it in the way her ministers whispered behind their sleeves, in the wary glances of her sons, in the subtle shifts of power that trembled through the court like the first ripples of frost. How many years have I ruled? She wondered. The years blurred together, a tapestry of victories and losses, alliances and betrayals. She remembered the feel of cold stone beneath her knees as a girl, the taste of fear and hope tangled on her tongue. She remembered the heat of ambition burning in her chest, the sweetness of triumph, the bitterness of loss. Now, as the world outside faded to gold and gray, Zetian felt the slow, inexorable approach of winter, not just in the air, but in her bones, her blood, her very spirit. She was not afraid, not truly, but she was wary. In the shadows of her chamber, the ghosts of old rivals seemed to stir. She could almost hear their voices, accusing, mocking, pleading for mercy. Her fingers tightened around the cup. I have outlasted them all. She told herself, I am the dragon on the throne. But even dragons grow old. Even dragons must choose what they leave behind. A distant bell tolled, its sound deep and mournful, echoing across the city. Zetian closed her eyes, drawing in the bitter scent of chrysanthemums, the faint salt of her own sweat, the distant promise of rain. The world was changing, she could feel it, like the first cold wind that signals the end of autumn and the coming of something darker, something unknown. The heavy doors creaked open, sending a ripple of cold air through the chamber. Two figures entered: Princess Tai Ping, Zetian's only daughter, and Li Xian, her eldest surviving son. Their footsteps echoed on the polished stone, measured and cautious, each step betraying a different rhythm. Tai Ping's light and swift, Li Xian's deliberate. Almost dragging, Tai Ping bowed deeply, her silk robes whispering against the floor. She wore a robe of deep indigo, embroidered with silver clouds, her hair arranged in an elaborate knot pinned with jade. Her face was calm, but her eyes flickered with nervous energy. Li Xian followed, his expression carefully blank. His robes were simple by comparison, dark blue trimmed with white. Yet his posture was rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. The faint scent of sandalwood clung to him, mingling with the sharper notes of ink and old parchment. "Mother," Tai Ping began, her voice soft but clear. "The council waits in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. They ask for your guidance on the matter of the border provinces." Zetian regarded her daughter for a long moment, studying the fine lines at the corners of Tai Ping's mouth. The quick, darting glance she cast at her brother. "The council is restless," Zetian murmured. "They have always been restless in autumn." Li Xian shifted, clearing his throat. "The generals grow impatient, honored mother. They say the northern tribes press harder every month. Some question whether the time has come for a new hand to guide the empire." A silence fell, thick as honey. The only sound was the faint clink of porcelain as Zetian set her cup aside. She watched her son, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted away from hers. The generals forget who secured the borders. They forget the victories you won, the reforms you brought. They would be fools to think anyone else could hold the empire together. Tai Ping stepped forward, her voice urgent. Zetian's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. And yet, even fools can be dangerous when they gather in numbers. Her gaze lingered on Li Xian. "Tell me, my son, do you agree with them?" Li Xian's face flushed, his fists tightening. "I serve at your pleasure, mother. I have always—" "But do you agree?" Zetian pressed, her tone soft but unyielding. He hesitated, glancing at Tai Ping, then back at Zetian. "I think the empire needs stability, if your health fails. Mother is not dead yet, brother. Perhaps you should remember that." Tai Ping cut in, her words sharp as a blade. "I meant no disrespect, but the ministers talk. The people hear rumors. If we do not act, someone else will." Li Xian's mouth twisted. Zetian leaned back, feeling the ache in her spine, the cold settling deeper into her bones. She watched her children, one fierce, one cautious, both circling the throne like wolves scenting blood. "Power is a river," Zetian said softly. "It flows where it will. But it is the banks that shape it, the stones that slow its rush. I have been both river and stone. I have shaped this empire with my own hands. Do not think I will let it slip away so easily. You are still the emperor, mother, the only one who matters." Tai Ping's eyes shone with fierce pride, but for how much longer? Li Xian's jaw worked, his voice low. A long silence stretched, filled with the distant caw of crows and the rustle of leaves against the window. Zetian felt the tension coil tighter, invisible threads binding the three of them together, pulling and fraying at the same time. She motioned for her daughter to come closer. Tai Ping knelt at her side, her hand warm against Zetian's chilled skin. Zetian studied her. Her daughter's face, so like her own, had once been, proud and clever, eyes dark with secrets. Tai Ping, she said quietly, you must watch your brother. He is not a fool, but his ambition is a hungry thing. It will eat him if he does not master it. I will, mother. I promise. Tai Ping nodded, her fingers tightening. Zetian turned to Li Xian, her gaze steady. And you, my son. You have always wanted my approval. But you must decide what kind of emperor you wish to be. If you take the throne by force, you will never sleep without a knife at your throat. I only want to serve the empire, to honor our family. Li Xian looked down, shame and longing warring in his eyes. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Zetian saw the fear in her son's eyes, the desperation in her daughter's grip. She remembered her own youth, the hunger that had driven her, the choices that had left her both feared and alone. The distant bell tolled again, its sound mournful. The world was changing. The dawn crept over Luoyang like a hesitant brushstroke. Pale gold leaked into the shadows of the imperial palace. On this late autumn morning, the city still wore the night's chill, a thin, biting cold that slipped through the silk screens and clung to every stone. The palace grounds, usually alive with the clatter of servants and the call of courtiers, seemed muffled, as if the world itself held its breath. Mist rolled from the riverbanks, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke, and mingled with the sharper tang of incense drifting from the ancestral halls. Wu Zetian sat upright on her lacquered daybed, wrapped in a robe of crimson silk embroidered with gold phoenixes. The fabric was heavy, the golden thread cold and stiff against her skin, yet she felt the cold through it. Her bones ached with every breath. Her hair, streaked now with silver, was coiled high and tight, held in place by pins shaped like dragons and peonies, but a few wisps had escaped, brushing her neck like ghosts. Her hands, once quick and strong, trembled slightly as she lifted a cup of chrysanthemum tea to her lips. The tea was fragrant, bittersweet, the steam curling into the air, and carrying memories of summers long past. Outside, somewhere beyond the latticed doors, a peacock screamed, its cry sharp and lonely in the morning air. Wu closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She could hear the distant shuffle of slippers on polished stone, the muted voices of eunuchs and ladies in waiting, the soft clink of jade bangles. The world was waking, but Wu felt as if she hovered on the edge of something vast and unknowable, a precipice, or perhaps a grave. Her body was failing her. She could feel it in the stiffness of her joints, the heaviness of her chest. Even the simplest movements sent pain flickering through her limbs, like fire racing along dry grass. She remembered the days when she strode through these halls with the lightness of a panther, her presence enough to silence a room. Now she moved slowly, each step measured, her breath shallow and careful. But it was not her body that troubled her most. It was the silence that had crept into her life, the way the courtiers bowed lower but met her eyes less often, the way her sons whispered behind closed doors. She had ruled as emperor for decades, wielding power sharper than any sword, but now she could feel it slipping from her grasp, as insubstantial as mist. She sipped her tea again, the porcelain cool against her lips. The taste was familiar, comforting in its bitterness. She thought of the years, so many years, since she first entered the palace as a girl, her heart pounding with hope and fear. She had been nothing then, just another pretty face in a sea of silk and ambition. Yet she had climbed, step by bloody step, to the highest seat in the land. She had worn the dragon crown not as a consort or a regent, but as emperor in her own right, a woman in a world that believed women existed only to serve now. As the sun crept higher, Wu Zetian wondered what would remain when she was gone. She glanced at the low table beside her, where a scroll lay open, an unfinished edict, her final attempt to shape the future. The characters blurred before her eyes, the ink dark as sorrow. Would they remember her as a tyrant, a usurper, a monster? Or would her name endure, carried on the wind like the cry of a peacock, strange, wild, impossible to ignore? She set the cup down with a faint clatter, her hand unsteady. The world beyond her chamber was changing, shifting beneath her feet. She could smell the coming winter in the air, sharp as iron, and she felt it settle in her bones. Yet even as her body failed, her mind burned with the old fire. She would not go quietly. She would not be erased. A soft knock at the door broke the silence, and Wu straightened, her spine stiffening with the old pride. She drew the robe tighter around her, pressing her palm to the embroidered phoenix as if to draw strength from its golden wings. "Enter," she said, her voice still carrying the echo of command, though it trembled at the edges as the door slid open and the scent of sandalwood and fresh ink drifted in. Wu Zetian prepared herself. The world would not remember her as weak, not while she still breathed. The door parted with a gentle rasp, and two figures entered the Empress's chamber. The first was Shangguan Wanner, Wu's trusted secretary, her face pale and luminous in the early light, her hair pulled back with a single jade pin. She carried a stack of bamboo slips and a brush, her movements precise and respectful. The second was Li Dan, Wu's son, his robes a deep blue that shimmered like river water, his eyes wary and dark beneath finely arched brows. Wanner bowed deeply, the sleeves of her robe trailing across the polished floor. "Your Majesty," she murmured, her voice soft as silk. The scent of her perfume, a delicate blend of plum blossom and sandalwood, mingled with the sharper tang of ink. Li Dan lingered at the threshold, his gaze flickering between his mother and the morning outside. Wu studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands twisted the cord of his belt. He was a grown man, a prince, but in this moment he seemed almost boyish, uncertain, afraid. "Come closer, both of you," Wu said, her voice steady. She gestured to the low table, where cushions waited. The movement sent a twinge of pain through her side, and she masked it with a smile. Wanner settled beside the table, arranging the slips with careful fingers. Li Dan hesitated, then knelt, his silk robes whispering against the floor. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Wanner broke the silence first. "There is news from the southern provinces, Your Majesty. The grain harvest is poor this year. The magistrates request relief." Wu nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Send rice from the imperial stores. Promise them aid, but remind the magistrates that the people must not be taxed beyond their means. Famine breeds rebellion." "Yes, Your Majesty." Wanner dipped her brush in ink, her hand steady. "Mother," Li Dan began, his voice low. "There are also rumors, whispers among the court. Some say you are unwell. They wonder who will rule when you are gone." Wu's gaze sharpened. She could feel the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "And what do you say, my son? Are you ready to take the throne?" Li Dan's lips parted, but he hesitated. "I wish only to serve the Empire, to serve you." Wanner's eyes flickered between them, her face unreadable. The scent of ink grew stronger as she pressed the brush to the bamboo, the scratch of the bristles loud in the quiet room. Wu leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You must be careful, Dan. The court is full of vipers. They would see us torn apart, mother against son. You must be stronger than them, stronger than me." Li Dan's shoulders hunched, and he looked away. "I have never been as strong as you, mother." A silence fell, heavy as velvet. Wu studied her son's profile, the fine bones, the delicate mouth. She remembered holding him as a baby, his skin soft as new silk, his eyes wide with wonder. Now he was a man, and yet so fragile. Wanner cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "There are also matters of succession, Your Majesty. The ministers press for a decree. They fear chaos if the throne is left unclaimed." Wu's jaw tightened. She could taste bitterness on her tongue, sharper than the tea. They fear a woman's rule more than chaos. They would rather see the empire burn than obey me. "Not all of them, mother. Some are loyal." Li Dan's hands clenched in his lap. Wu laughed, the sound brittle. "Loyalty is a coin easily spent. Remember that." Wanner's brush paused, her eyes darting to Wu's face. "Your Majesty, if I may, history is written by those who survive. If you name an heir, your legacy will be secure." Wu turned to her, searching her face. Wanner's eyes were dark and bright, quick as a sparrow's, but Wu saw the fear there, the fear of a world without her. "And if I do not," Wu asked softly, "then others will decide for you, and they will not be kind." Wanner hesitated. A gust of wind rattled the screens, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Wu shivered, drawing her robe tighter. She saw the future stretching before her, a road shrouded in mist, lined with shadows. Li Dan reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her arm. "Mother, please, let me help you. Let me protect